Hi, I'm Bob the Hollow, and this is a lore dump. These are all things that I've noticed throughout the game and wanted to share but couldn't fit into any of my other videos. So, without further ado... We've killed Gundyr and took his soul. How is he alive? Well, he isn't. The armor itself is probably being controlled by the Pus of Man, just like the Dragon's Lair armor is controlled by the Pilgrim Butterflies. But what is that thing, the Dark Pus of Man? Well, it seems to be humanity gone wild, just like what happened to Menace during the times of Ulasil. What seems strange to me is that their appearances are contained to the Cemetery of Ash and Lothric Castle. Why are they here, and why now? The Dark Sigil, granted to the Unkindled, is a bottomless pitch-black hole from which the darkness of humanity seeps from, so it would stand to reason that these hollows, that spurt the Pus of Man, are related to the Unkindled that hail from that very same cemetery, and just like the wretches of Irithyll Dungeon would be failed attempts of the experiments that led to Ocelot, these hollows would be failed attempts of the endeavor for creating fully functioning Unkindled Ash. I have postulated before that the wyverns at the Dragon Barracks would have been humans once, that ascended to that form through the path of the dragon which, at the time, also explained their Pus of Man, and now, it still fits perfectly with this new theory. Also, on my very first Dark Souls video, Dark Lord Gundyr, I had proposed that he was supposed to have been a contender for the position of Dark Lord, and his Pus of Man, bleeding out of his Dark Sigil, would serve to further corroborate that theory, for only a champion of Ash can usurp the first flame. If you've watched my non-Very Nox video, you may recall the point when I was talking about Fina in Rosaria and brought up the relief sitting at both sides of the statue of a goddess in front of the Firekeeper's corpse. Well, Reddit user Velexius brought this Cathedral of the Deep engraving to my attention, and they both share similarities, which could be another small piece of evidence to support my theory, since they would both be located in places that, according to the theory I proposed, are related to the same character. Also, I'm still trying to figure out Leonhard, but his moonlight-imbued weapon, which was given to him by Rosaria, could help that theory as well, since Gwendolyn's affinity to moonlight magic could explain how Rosaria would have come into possession of it in the first place. And Gwendolyn himself would already be connected to that first statue through the Dark Moon Seance ring that can be found in front of another one of those statues down at the catacombs. I had actually forgotten about this ring and was reminded by Marty McFly. Thanks, mate. I've mentioned in a video the idea that the stone-humped hag in the drag heap could be the Farling Shrine handmaid. I didn't have any substantial evidence to support that, but it seemed like the most likely explanation. Viewer video poster even pointed out the fact that the two characters have different voice actors, so I gave a couple of possible explanations for that and left it at your discretion to decide whether it was believable enough or not. But I have recently been exposed to a better possibility. Cheps, from Cheps Gaming, got it from one of his viewers, Fallen Angel 2100. It would state that the stone-humped hag would have been Lorien's wet nurse, Emma is Lothric's, and the shrine handmaid was supposed to have been Ocelot's. That's perfect. It's simple, logical, and I see no reason not to believe it. We may not agree on other aspects of his theory, but regarding this part, yeah, I'm definitely going with that one from here on. The link to his video is in the description, by the way. Bloodborne is the Soulsborne game where Lovecraftian inspirations are the most obvious, but Dark Souls already had some of its own, long before Bloodborne came to be. In Dark Souls, sorcery is considered pure knowledge, the study and understanding of the laws that govern that world. In order to create the form of sorcery we came to know, Sif, the Scaleless, had to unlock the secrets hidden within the primordial crystal which, in fact, drove him mad. The same fate that later befell good old Big Hat Logan. An ancient eldritch wisdom whose understanding will drive you to madness. What could possibly be more Lovecraftian than that? This interview dealt mostly with graphical design, but Miyazaki let a few lore notes slip, which is good because these things could not otherwise be confirmed. Well, they're confirmed. The statue behind Framped in Firelink Shrine is of a goddess. I've seen people claiming that it doesn't have to be of a goddess, but apparently Miyazaki begs to differ. Andre is just a blacksmith, so yeah, stop with the theories. Unless they're fanfic love stories, of course. Also, the blacksmith statues are petrified blacksmiths. They aren't just statues, and they aren't related to Andre either, so they're more likely blacksmiths from Astora. Maybe the hair and beard were in vogue for blacksmiths of that time. And Ceaseless Discharge is the first demon. He isn't the last son of the old Witch of Izalith, he's the first son of the new Bed of Chaos. And on a personal side note about the Bed of Chaos, who says that the Witch of Izalith failed? She did create a self-sustaining source of life for herself, her daughters, and the demons. It's not the first flame, but it is a success. If it weren't for her meddling, who knows how much their society could have flourished. Calling them a failure just because they look different is a very narrow-minded attitude from the gods indeed. Also, still as a side note, claiming that the Bed of Chaos wasn't Izalith is a bit far-fetched, considering that we got an actual Lord Soul from it. The only other two Lord Souls come from Nito and Gwyn, so if you're going to consider the possibility that it wasn't Izalith, then you're opening the floodgates for people to claim that the Nito we fight was actually Nito's brother and that Gwyn was actually Lloyd. Reddit user HelloGB00 posted a very interesting theory that I'd like to share. It goes as follows. As we all know, Dark Souls protagonists ruin everything by touching everything they come across. Paintings, shells, you name it. But my favorite time the Ashen One fucked up is when they picked up the Ashen Estus ring. The description makes it clear we're supposed to wake up with it, but since we picked it up in the past, it's not there. We literally could have had the ring from the start of the game, but since we picked it up in the Untended Graves, we lost it. The Ashen One literally robbed his own grave. Cool. So let's recap. Unkindled are undead who failed to link the flame and are reborn as unkindled. But why now, and how exactly are we reborn? As I have stated before, Sullivan, first of the scholars, would have brought the knowledge of embering from the smoldering lake to Lothric in order to help Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth and Queen of Lothric, in the creation of the Unkindled. The Unkindled being, in theory, an essential backup of the throne ritual, but the prince would be taught by Sullivan to doubt the linking of the first flame, so the Unkindled would have another purpose instead. Then, we have the Pilgrims of Londor, who came to Lothric to die, apparently. And judging by Yoel's questline, they were supposed to have died by granting the Dark Sigil to someone, and that someone would have to be unkindled. So, they are Pilgrims of Londor, and Londor's goal is to usurp the first flame. Their goal is to grant the Dark Sigil to the Unkindled, so the goal of the Unkindled's creation would have to be to usurp the first flame as well, as per Londor's plan. Okay, is that it? Well, no. The Unkindled are reborn at the Cemetery of Ash, and in that same place, albeit another time, we can also find the Hollow's Ashes, further linking Londor in its plan to the creation of the Champions of Ash. And I believe that one of these champions, Frida, was supposed to have been the Lord of Hollows all along. It would stand to reason that she, of all Unkindled, would be granted this honor, and in Firelink Shrine, with the Sword of Avalon in hand, she'd have a heap of Unkindled to choose from and stake through the head in wedlock. She was tucked away inside the painting, where Father Ariandel, now a Corvian, would be a sympathizer to Velka's principles and would side with Londor, just like she once sided with the Occult Rebellion. The toll of the now useless Frozen Bell would signal her to return, but she turned it down and founded a new Saber Church inside the painting. Londor has many champions to choose from, but she's the only one that can, after her own twisted vision, save the forlorn of the Painted World. And so, we became the backup not only for the throne ritual, but for the usurpation as well. We all know the theory that Guinevere was the queen of Lothric, and if you've seen my other videos, you know that I disagree with it. At one point, it was brought to my attention that projected Heal could be used as an argument pro-Guinevere, but once again, I respectfully disagree. It is found in Lothric, but it makes no mention to the queen whatsoever, and it was said that it could be a link between Guinevere and Lothric since she'd have to be present for them to feel her caress. But the Japanese description says healing and blessing, rather than caress and bounty. It's referring to her miracles and blessings. It does not imply that the inhabitants of Lothric would have felt her caress, as it has been argued. It says that he tried to remember her and spun a serious story. Her original miracles, or tales, were lost, so they created a new one. The world was coming to an end, they were looking for comfort, and there's nothing more comforting in Dark Souls than Guinevere's bosom. So they spun fictional stories about her. I honestly see it as another From Software troll towards the community. They know about the common misconception that Guinevere was the queen. They created the misconception. And they believe that all the tourists who fall for it are both innocent and sincere in their beliefs. Were the red eye orbs farmed from the heads of the twisted inhabitants of Hulasil? White Titanite reinforces both divine and occult weapons, reinforcing my theory that the occult rebellion sprang from within the Way of White. A very unassuming shield for sure, but it does beg the questions of why were twin snakes an old symbol of Lordran, and why did it become the symbol of the Great Swamp? Also, the fact that Vince and Nico wielded such shields oddly reflects the symbol's modern use, since it was mistakenly transformed into a symbol of medicine by the military. The Zweihander in the Fairlink graveyard is probably a hint to this version of Darkus from one of the trailers. Only a Mad Hollow would choose to fight with this. The wolves were already present in Ariamis, we could hear them howl. Another small piece of evidence linking Sullivan to Lothric and his position as first of the scholars is that Grey Rat will sell Lothric knight weapons and the scholar's candlestick after his trip to Earthel. Oh dear. The three women of the Painted World probably became forlorn on the account of being used as raw material for making witch tree branch staffs. Dark Souls has seen its share of strange trees throughout the years, but Lothric's just pushing it. Hollowed trees, tree people, cursed trees, and end of times pilgrim sprouting angel blooming would-be trees. Just take your pick. About the hollow trees, it looks like the praying hollows couldn't be bothered to move, even after the trees started growing around them. Nothing to see here, moving on. What we have in the Undead Settlement is different though. They're not growing from the ground, they seem to have been enveloped in some sort of tree husk. I'd say that given the properties of the close by rotted greatwood, that could have been a way of sealing away cursed individuals. Or, more interesting possibility, and in my opinion more likely, would be that it was used to protect yourself from affliction. Most of them are sitting in rocking chairs rather than thrown around like the other corpses, in a building filled with books. The only other building in the settlement where you can find books is the first one you enter, where there's a single bookcase, and that is also the only other place where you can find these husk-encased hollows. The presence of the books would infer the presence of some kind of scholar, and I think the husks could be their version of the plague doctor's garb, and just like the real thing, it wouldn't have worked as well as expected. Oh, and the high-hanging fruit from the curse-rotted greatwood have limbs hanging out of them. That's just gross. The things that sprout from the pilgrims' corpses in the Ringed City are sometimes mistaken for tree-like people, but they're actually humanoid bugs, just like the so-called angels. It has been argued that maybe the bug didn't sprout from the corpses, but I think they did, considering that Londor pilgrims created pilgrim butterflies in the presence of the broken chains that once bound their shells. The difference between the butterflies and the angels can be easily explained by the maturity of the parasite at the time in which it would have conjured the airborne apparition. Continuing on the topic of these pilgrim parasites, what exactly are they? In the real world, we have parasitoid insects that lay their eggs inside other insects, leaving hosts that will carry, protect, and ultimately die for their larvae overlords. And in the world of Dark Souls, of course this concept would be taken to a whole new nightmarish level. These bug-like creatures are found in the Ringed City DLC, and in that same DLC, we can also find the white-faced locust preachers. Most likely based on the white-faced bush cricket and the Mushishi manga, these uncanny sermon givers would use their very prominent ovipositors to lay their eggs into their human victims. Granted that, in real life, locusts would play the part of the host, but this is Dark Souls. You adapt, overcome, and endure. In this latest installment of the series, we are introduced to the blue-robed, traveling undead clerics who can also be found in the Abyssal Swamp where the locust preachers reside. And their similarity to the Pilgrims of Londor, from whom the offspring would eventually hatch, is undeniable. And if you find it strange that the white-faced locusts would be the origin of the pilgrim parasites that would wind up at the end of the Age of Fire, just try to remember that the Ringed City is a glimpse of both the past and the future of this world. Back in the real world, jewel wasps and many others that practice these breeding procedures affect the brain of their hosts, wildly changing their behavior to turn them into the willing caretakers that they need. The host will not fight, it will not flee. They will defend the invading offspring with their lives, while the wasp's larvae feed upon their flesh. The undead clerics wore their back covers to prevent becoming seedbeds of darkness, unaware that the covers were seedbeds themselves. They were entrusted with a duty. They were sent out into the world to spread the locust's breed and bring back the unwitting converts. Their fanatic behavior was exploited by Londor, who turned them into their pilgrims. Some of them tried, but failed, to return to the swamp. And all the while, the locusts are still preaching, beckoning the undead. Fear not the dark, and let the feast begin. Yes, this one's going to be highly speculative. First, a little backstory. I had originally intended to solve the problem of having the Dragon Slayer set in Archdragon Peak. I think the most popular theory is that Ornstein was an illusion in Dark Souls 1. I don't like that theory, I think it's rather short-sighted, it ignores facts, it leaves new questions unanswered, and it creates more questions than it answers. We got Ornstein's soul in Dark Souls 1, that's the biggest argument against him being an illusion. Also, if Gwendolyn could create illusions as powerful as that, he'd be unstoppable. Also, there'd be boss illusions to fight for him in his corridor, instead of him just, dying. Also again, you're opening Pandora's box with this one, since now, every single living thing in the game would be a possible illusion. I have already presented my answer to this problem in a previous lore dump, but I feel the need to address it again because there doesn't seem to be any consensus among the community. So, the answer came through Sacred Oath and the Dragon Slayer armor boss. The sun's firstborn is the Nameless King, of course. His faithful first knight is Ornstein, as stated by the Leo Ring, and Dark Souls 3 introduces the brave Dragon Slayer who served them both as a new canonic character, since this paragraph didn't exist prior to Dark Souls 3. You get Sacred Oath by ranking up in the Warriors of Sunlight Covenant, offering medals to the Nameless King statue in Lothric, about 30 feet from the Dragon Slayer armor boss fight. They asked the question of who was this brave Dragon Slayer, and then immediately answered it with he was the original owner of the armor that is now controlled by the Pilgrim Butterfly. Now, the question would be what happened to him then? And that's where Archdragon Peak comes in. He abandoned his original armor and donned Ornstein's to honor his memory. He looked after the cathedral for a time, but feeling disillusioned by Anorlando's sad state of affairs, he eventually left in search of his only surviving captain, the sun's firstborn. Okay, now about smoke. It's just a continuation of the same theory, really. A new knight picked up Ornstein's place, and likewise, a knight picked up Smoke's place as well. And the biggest hint here would be Smoke's armor's current description, which calls him a knight. Considering that he was never a knight at all, then I think it's pretty clear that some other person, an actual knight, took his position. After Ornstein 2.0 left, he was the last knight to stand in defense of the ruined cathedral. Since you can get his hammer in Irithyll and armor after defeating Aldrich, then I think it's also safe to assume that he stayed there for good, which would inevitably place him under the service of Sullivan. And about the connection between his armor and Aldrich, I think that the original Smoke may have been used as a role model for Aldrich, to help convince him of the benefits of eating people. Up to this point, I think it's all kinda solid. It's just a matter of following the logic. The part where I claim that Vort might be Smoke 2.0 is the part where speculation really kicks in. I'm not saying that he most definitely is this knight that took Smoke's position. I'm saying that he could very well be. We'd still need to know what happened to Smoke 2.0, and Vort would fit the bill. Not to mention that all bosses have quite a bit of lore to them, so if I'm wrong about this, then Vort would be the only boss who's just a bigger version of a regular enemy. This ghostly visage, walking alongside the dancer, would be of Vort as he was leaving Irithyll. The differences in shape and size are easily explained, since this version of the dancer is also extremely different from the dancer we get to meet. Their bodies would have been deformed by Sullivan's magic, as stated in the description of her armor. And he'd be a lot thinner than Smoke's armor, but our character can be really skinny and wear that armor too. Like I said in the beginning, this is highly speculative, but it does fit well with my theory for the Dragon Slayer armor set. It explains Smoke's armor's description, and it explains the origins of Vort. And come on, two giant fat bastards with giant blunt weapons ready to crush you with their giant big fat butts? Just give me the benefit of the doubt is all I'm saying. The ancient dragons wouldn't die of old age, but they were just as vulnerable as the gods were. The gods have presumably survived many cycles of the first flame, so the flame wouldn't be necessary for their so-called immortality, just for their power. Demons can be used as an indication of this, since, in theory, they would be immortal so long as the chaos flame burns, just as the gods would be immortal so long as the first flame burns. But the stray demon, Lothric, has no trace of the chaos flame left in him, and yet he lives. Maybe they were already immortal before they found their souls in the first flame, maybe their souls are what made them immortal. Either way, the pygmies would be immortal too, since they came from the same proto-race and found the dark soul inside the first flame. Regarding humans, I think our natural state would also be one of immortality. We are descendant of immortal beings, and just like the later generations of gods were immortal, we would be as well. But the gods placed their sign upon the first man to control them, much like, and I do believe it is, the dark sign. So the dark sign would always be there. You'd lose humanity and souls through it, and that would keep you mortal. Once the flame starts to fade, once the humanity inside you starts getting stronger, it would trigger and become visible to the naked eye. It can no longer keep you mortal, so it will at least keep you hollowed. We're tiny, we fuck like bunnies and spread like roaches. Now imagine that real-life roaches were immortal beings, who could absorb our souls in order to grow stronger. Wouldn't you want to prevent that? That's where the dark sign comes in. It's a safeguard against humanoid, immortal, godlike roaches. We've been robbed not only of our sanity, but of our immortality as well. The Black Hands, a group of assassins who serves Lothric's royalty, but Lothric's royalty is gone, except for the princes, who aren't absent but have excluded themselves from their royal duties, so they serve Emma instead. I mean, she certainly seems to be in charge. The Black Hands, a group of assassins who serves Lothric's surrogate royalty. Under Emma's orders, they are positioned at the 3 entrances of the Grand Archives, effectively creating a lockdown of the building. The clerics and knights have never trusted the scholars. Not only that, but Gertrude, mother of the Angelic Faith, is said to be somewhere in there right now. Once there were 3. An unknown hunter was positioned at the top of the Grand Archives, but he was killed by angels. Once there were 3, now there are 2. Gotthard helped us on our journey to defeat the Lords of Cinder and returned to his post where he awaited, key in hand, to help us out once more. But he was killed before he ever had the chance, and most have come to believe that he was killed by Kamui, based on his sword's description, which says that he fled the castle and, in theory, his duties too. Once there were 3, now there is 1. Kamui was tasked with guarding Prince Lothric and was positioned at the Grand Archives entrance that led to the prince's quarters. His demise came at the hands of a champion of Ash. Once there were 3, now there are no more. But there is more to it. First, there's the question of why was Gotthard killed? The problem with the currently accepted theory is that his sword's original description leans more towards he was away or sent away from the castle, implying that he was out in official Black Hand business. There is also Kamui's companions, Kriemhild and Albert. I had considered once that maybe Gotthard might have been killed by the Dragon's Lair armor, but then I remembered that you can kill that boss before he dies, so yeah. Now, I have come to believe that our first instinct was right and Kamui really was the perpetrator. As always, things become more clear if you try looking at them as a whole instead of separately. Emma still wished for the prince to become a Lord of Cinder despite his refusal. Gotthard agreed with her, in that this would be the best way to serve the throne by helping it ascend to the ultimate glory, while Kamui, who looked after the prince, decided to uphold his wishes. Being a covert assassin operating from the shadows, outside the jurisdiction and power struggle of the 3 pillars, he placed Kriemhild as a spy inside the Grand Archives, posing as a pupil to the Twin Sages and spying on the scholars. She may have been their favorite pupil, but once you get to the top of the archives, it's pretty clear where her allegiance lies. Albert stayed close to Emma and spied on the knights and clerics who, in effect, worked together. I once assumed Emma may have died after spending all her energy keeping the dancer out, but judging by the pool of blood that can be found around her in her final moments, she was killed too, and following Kamui's orders, Albert would have been her killer. He sees you off to that settlement, whether you succeed or die trying to kill off the Lords of Cinder. It really doesn't matter. You are all enemies to the secluded prince. And he uses a black crystal and leaves you behind if you kill Emma, because his job here is simply done. Grand betrayals, assassins and spies. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. I know some of the stuff I talked about today is a bit controversial, so whether you agree or disagree with them, leave a comment. I really would like to hear what you have to say about it. Or come and find me at Sinclair Lore's Discord server. It's a very cozy place to talk about Dark Souls or anything, really. And you can take the opportunity to check out her channel, she's got some really good stuff over there. As always, thank you very much for watching. I would also like to thank Vinny for helping support this channel at Patreon, and if you like my content and haven't subscribed yet, feel free to do it so you don't miss out on any future videos. Until then, see ya.